The story of Musa and Khidr begins not with a miracle or confrontation, but with a question that reveals one of the most profound lessons about knowledge, humility, and divine wisdom. Musa, one of the greatest prophets, the man who spoke directly with Allah, once stood before his people and was asked who was the most knowledgeable person on earth. Naturally, and perhaps innocently, he replied, I am by. Yet Allah gently corrected him not to humiliate him, but to remind him that knowledge is not a crown of superiority, it's a trust that demands humility. Allah revealed to him that there was someone else, a servant of Allah, who possessed knowledge that Musa did not. And so began a journey that would reshape how we understand divine wisdom itself. Now imagine that Musa, the prophet of Bani Israel, walking across lands and seas to find someone whose wisdom was hidden from him. That scene alone is deeply humbling. It reminds us that no matter how much we know, no matter how spiritually elevated or intellectually advanced we think we are, there will always be a dimension of truth beyond our grasp. Knowledge is not about accumulation. It's about submission to the fact that Allah knows and we do not. This journey teaches us that true wisdom begins where pride ends. The human ego loves to believe it understands everything, that it can define what is right, what is wrong, what is fair, and what is unjust. But the story of Musa and Khidr dismantles this illusion piece by piece. Allah is teaching Musa, and through him us, that the first condition of divine knowledge is humility. You cannot see the wisdom of Allah if you stand in arrogance before him. Musa's willingness to travel in search of Khidr, to learn from someone else despite his own status, is a profound act of intellectual submission. It shows us that faith and curiosity are not opposites, they are companions. The believer is not someone who stops questioning. The believer is someone who questions within the framework of humility. Musa's questions were not acts of rebellion, but of sincerity. He wanted to understand the ways of Allah, to see the wisdom that lies beneath the surface of life. We live in a time where people often mistake information for wisdom. The more we read, the more we assume we know. But real knowledge, the kind that transforms your heart, begins when you realize how little you truly understand of Allah's plan. Just as Musa had to travel in search of Khidr, we must also journey away from the arrogance of certainty toward the humility of faith. It is not weakness to admit that you don't understand why things happen. It is a mark of spiritual maturity. Think of how this applies to our own lives. How often do we face situations that make no sense, delays, losses, disappointments, and immediately jump to conclusions about what's fair or unfair? Yet perhaps in those very moments, Allah is whispering the same truth He taught Musa. You do not see the whole picture. The journey of humility is the journey of trust, trusting that behind what you cannot comprehend lies the perfect wisdom of the one who sees all. Musa's story begins with a lesson that every seeker of truth must learn. If you wish to understand Allah's wisdom, you must first empty your cup. Let go of the illusion that you know best. Let go of the pride that blinds the heart. Because only when the heart bows in humility can the mind begin to see the light of divine understanding. The hidden wisdom of Allah is not given to those who think they know. It is revealed to those who admit they don't. When Musa finally meets Khidr, he does so with the eagerness of a sincere seeker. He humbly asks permission to accompany him, promising patience and obedience. Yet, as their journey unfolds, we see something profoundly human in Musa's reactions: confusion, discomfort, even frustration. Khidr does things that appear utterly wrong. He damages a boat belonging to poor sailors who rely on it for their livelihood. He kills a young boy without apparent reason. And then he rebuilds a wall for a people who had refused them hospitality. Each act defies logic. Each act seems unjust. And each time, Musa cannot help but speak out, questioning, protesting, trying to make sense of what he sees. It's easy for us, sitting comfortably with hindsight, to say that Musa should have waited, that he should have trusted. But how many times have we reacted the same way in our own lives when something happens that feels unfair, when the job you wanted slips away, when a loved one is taken too soon, when your efforts don't bear fruit? Don't we too ask why? We may not voice it out loud, but our hearts echo the same confusion. Ya Allah, this doesn't make sense. Why would you allow this to happen? This is where the story of Musa and Khidr moves from history to psychology. Allah is teaching us something profound about human perception, that what we see is not always what it means. We live in a world of appearances, and our judgments are shaped by what meets the eye, but the divine plan operates beyond the surface. What looks like destruction may be protection. What feels like loss may actually be mercy, and what seems unjust might be the very foundation of future justice. The damaged boat, for instance, was not an act of cruelty but of compassion. Khidr damaged it to protect the poor sailors from a tyrant who was seizing every usable ship. The killing of the boy, as harsh as it appeared, was mercy for his believing parents, sparing them from a future of pain that the child's rebellion would have caused. and the wall rebuilt for an ungrateful people, concealed beneath it a treasure meant for 2 orphans, a gift preserved through the righteousness of their father. Each act, when revealed in its full context, was a masterpiece of divine precision. The message is timeless. Never assume that you've understood the full story. Allah's wisdom often hides behind what looks like chaos. Our perspective is like looking through a small window. We see fragments, not the full horizon. The believer learns to trust that even when something seems meaningless, Allah's plan never is. Philosophically, this story confronts one of the greatest challenges of faith, the problem of apparent injustice. It teaches that the absence of understanding does not mean the absence of wisdom. In our limited human framework, we measure life by immediate outcomes, but Allah measures by eternal purpose. Every test, every loss, every delay is part of a design that may only make sense years later, or perhaps only in the hereafter. There's also a deeply emotional truth here. When you are in the middle of a hardship, you are like Musa on that boat, witnessing damage, feeling confusion, unable to see the bigger plan. Only later, when time has passed and Allah's wisdom unfolds, do you realize that what you called destruction was actually salvation in disguise. The heart that trusts Allah in the dark will always see light in the end. So the next time life presents something that feels unfair, remember the lesson of Musa and Khidr. What you see is not always what it means. Beneath the surface of every event lies a divine wisdom that your eyes cannot yet perceive. Trust that Allah never writes a story without purpose. The challenge is to keep faith alive while the meaning remains hidden, because that is where real trust is born. And perhaps the most powerful reflection is this: what if right now the thing that breaks your heart is actually the very thing saving your soul? Patience, that was the single condition Khidr placed upon Musa before allowing him to accompany him. He said, "You will not be able to have patience with me." It was not an insult. It was a truth about human nature. Patience is one of the hardest virtues to maintain when faced with the unknown. It's easy to be patient when you understand what's happening, when everything aligns with your expectations. But true patience begins when your logic fails, when the situation makes no sense, when the heart is screaming for answers and silence is all you receive. Musa, despite his strength of faith, struggled with this. Every time Khidr did something unexpected, Musa reacted not out of arrogance, but out of sincerity. He genuinely wanted to understand. He wanted to see the wisdom of Allah manifest in real time. But divine wisdom doesn't always reveal itself in the moment. It unfolds in layers, through time, through experience, through reflection. And this is the essence of Sabr, to remain composed while the unseen plan of Allah is still writing itself out. There's a psychological depth here that speaks directly to the human condition. We live in a world obsessed with immediacy, immediate answers, immediate results, immediate clarity. When something goes wrong, we rush to fix it, to make sense of it. Yet, Allah's wisdom does not operate on our timeline. Sometimes He delays the understanding because that delay itself shapes us. It teaches us surrender, endurance, and faith. Patience isn't passive waiting, it's active trust. The belief that Allah is working even when you see nothing moving. Think about how patience functions in our daily lives. Every test, every heartbreak, every delay is like Khidr's journey. Something is happening beyond our perception. When you lose something dear, your heart demands explanation. But Sabr teaches you to say, even if I never understand in this life, I know Allah's plan is perfect. That's not weakness, that's spiritual maturity. The one who can wait without losing faith has reached a level of strength that no amount of knowledge can give. The Prophet said, no one has been given a gift better and more comprehensive than patience. Why? Because patience is the container that holds faith together when everything else begins to fall apart. It's the bridge between confusion and clarity, between the breaking point and the breakthrough. When Musa followed Khidr, he was being trained not in knowledge, but in perspective, to see beyond appearances, to wait before judging, to trust before understanding. In our own struggles, we often want to rush to the ending. We want to see how the story resolves. But Allah, in His mercy, sometimes keeps the wisdom hidden until we are ready to receive it. The hardship you're facing today might be the very thing preparing you for a blessing tomorrow. The unanswered prayer today might be the shield protecting you from something harmful. And when that moment of clarity finally arrives, you realize that Allah was never absent. He was simply waiting for you to learn Sabr. Philosophically, patience represents the balance between intellect and faith. The intellect wants explanation, faith wants trust, and the believer learns to harmonize the two. You don't abandon your mind. You just let your faith guide where your mind cannot reach. That is the beauty of Sabr. It is both strength and surrender at once. So when Khidr told Musa he would not be able to have patience, he wasn't predicting failure. He was revealing a universal truth. Every human heart wrestles between wanting to understand and learning to trust. And in that tension lies the growth of the soul. Patience, then, is not just waiting for Allah's wisdom, it's walking with Him through the silence, knowing that every unanswered question has a purpose. The story of Musa and Khidr reminds us that what you cannot understand now will one day make sense. Until then, hold on, stay patient, and trust that Allah's timing is never late. Because sometimes the delay you hate most is the moment Allah is using to build the strength you'll need for what comes next. At the end of this extraordinary journey, when Khidr finally explains the meaning behind his actions, the full picture comes into view, and everything that once seemed confusing suddenly makes perfect sense. The boat that he damaged was actually saved from a tyrant's seizure. The boy who was killed would have grown into a disbeliever, bringing grief to his righteous parents. The wall he rebuilt was concealing a treasure meant for two orphans, preserved because of their father's piety. Every detail, every moment, every act had a purpose. There was no chaos, there was no injustice, there was only divine wisdom, precise, intentional, and merciful. This is where the story reaches its deepest message. Allah's plan is always working, even when we don't see it. We often experience fragments of life, isolated moments of joy or pain, success or failure, and we judge them as if we know their ultimate meaning. But Allah sees what we cannot. He is Al-Hakim, the all-wise, weaving our lives with a precision that transcends time and perception. What looks like randomness is actually orchestration. What feels like delay is often preparation. The story of Musa and Khidr reminds us that the divine plan doesn't depend on our understanding, it depends on Allah's wisdom. When something happens that breaks us, when the path we imagine collapses, or when every effort seems to fail, our natural instinct is to question. But from the divine perspective, those are not dead ends. They're detours designed to lead us towards something greater. Sometimes Allah withholds what you want to protect you from what you can't handle. Sometimes He closes one door because He's preparing you for a better one you haven't even imagined yet. Philosophically, this truth invites us to shift how we see reality itself. We are not the authors of our stories. We are characters within a narrative written by the one who knows the ending. To trust in Allah's plan means to live with the awareness that meaning exists even when it's hidden. The believer learns to surrender not because they've given up, but because they've grown wise enough to realize that control was never theirs to begin with. It's important to understand that this trust doesn't come easily. It's not blind faith or passive acceptance. It's an active, conscious choice to align your heart with divine wisdom. When life hurts, when your plans fail, when the world feels uncertain, you remind yourself, Allah is not punishing me, He is positioning me. Every setback has a hidden mercy. Every heartbreak contains a seed of growth. You might not see it now, but Allah never acts without purpose. There's a psychological beauty in this mindset. It liberates you from anxiety and despair. When you internalize that nothing in your life happens by accident, you begin to live with peace even amidst confusion. You stop obsessing over control and start focusing on trust. You learn that your role is not to foresee every outcome, but to respond with faith to every moment. That's what it means to live with tawakkul. To walk through uncertainty knowing that Allah's hand is guiding your steps, even when the path is dark. And perhaps that's why this story was revealed, not merely as a historical account, but as a spiritual mirror. We are all in some way walking the same journey Musa did. We witness things that make no sense, we struggle with patience, and we crave understanding. But the story concludes by lifting the veil and reminding us that Allah's plan is always in motion, always perfect, always compassionate, even when hidden from our sight. So the next time life confuses you, remember Khidr's lesson: what seems random is written, what feels delayed is deliberate, and what looks painful may be the beginning of your greatest mercy. Because in the end, the plan of Allah is never missing, it's merely unfolding. And the heart that learns to trust that truth will never again be shaken by what it cannot yet see.